So why did California see as the need to transition to Common Core and the testing component that came with it?
Well, we felt that Common Core had more of what kids are going to need to know in the future, that it was much more of a 21st century curriculum. The adjectives that are all over the Common Core are analysis, interpretation, extrapolation, deep reading of complex texts, application of things that you learned in one field to another field, estimation, and building and understanding patterns. And the old form of testing, which gave a student a question, usually fairly detailed, and then gave them 4 options, was just not aligned either. So Common Core enabled us really to rethink our testing system by your assessment should match your standards, and Common Core are general standards. But it was really a view that it was time to move on from standards that were done in the 1990s. We had done quite successfully some improvement of our system, but it wasn't good enough as we looked forward to what the 21st century America will look like, and the world.
What would you say were the biggest challenges in making that transition to Common Core, but more specifically, smarter balanced testing, if you will?
Well, I think it's very hard to assess these what are called higher order skills, analysis and so on. But just to talk about a couple elements of Smarter Balanced. Smarter Balanced has extended responses where you have to justify an answer or you're asked a question about your answer. You can't do that in a fixed form test with just 4 options. Second, Smarter Balanced has either an hour or an hour and a half performance exam where you get a problem like nuclear power, you read a bunch of sources, pro and con, you have to put together your own opinion, cite the sources. You can't do that with a closed-end thing with a pencil and bubble 1 out of 4 or 5. And so you couldn't possibly know whether kids were learning the Common Core with the old assessment. Moreover, Smarter Balanced is computer adaptive, meaning that every student is taking his or her own test. And so you could begin then to understand how deeply they understood the Common Core by going very high up the scale.
The computer adaptive testing, give me a little detail on how that's more beneficial to skill level assessment than you might have with something else.
Right. The computer adaptive assessment measures what students know and can do in a much deeper manner than an old-fashioned fixed form test with a pencil and the bubbles. So the testing instrument, when designed within Smarter Balanced, has an artificial intelligence mechanism that shows that if you're answering difficult questions, I give you more difficult questions until finally you're at the point where you can't really respond correctly. On the other hand, if you're struggling with fairly easy questions, I give you some easier ones, and then I have some level of what you really do know. So it's like the adaptive assessment has a range like that, and the old fixed form test has a range like that. So it is a more precise measurement of what students know. And so when you give, for example, the feedback to parents as to where their students are, you can really give a much more accurate reading than the older forms of testing.
What about the criticism that some people say that, there's way too much focus on testing. It's testing, and that's really not beneficial. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that was definitely true. Governor Brown, in his campaign in 2010, explicitly ran on cutting back testing, and the state board cut testing by over half, and that was before we cut the exit exam for graduation from high school. So there was way too much state testing, and we'll be restoring a little of that, but not a lot. So I think that's an important thing, that there's too much. The other thing I'd say about that question is, granting there's too much, but I'm a believer that it's not a bad thing to teach to a really good test. I would hope I and my colleagues here at Stanford have given good tests. They're not bubble tests. I wouldn't get near a bubble test. And I don't know of anybody in this building that would. But But, I did aim instruction to what I thought was a good test. So I think that this idea that all tests are inherently bad and we can't do better than what we've been doing since World War I, when we really initiated the form of testing we have. It's a straight derivative of World War I. We drafted all these people and we didn't know who was going to go in the infantry and who was going to make bread and whatever, and we gave them these quickie tests, and what you saw until just recently is just straight extrapolation of that. It got better, but still off of that model.
What kind of feedback do you get in talking with districts or with teacher or the administration about the transition to Common Core and Smarter Balance testing?
It's hard. It'll take a long time. It's extremely ambitious. It's a gamble. It's a bold thing, and we proceed with great humility. We don't know what's really going to happen, and it calls for, say in mathematics, a resequencing of how you teach math. It moves teachers and students away from memorizing formulas without understanding the concepts. It demands much higher level of application of mathematics in unfamiliar settings. If you came in here and we're in Stanford and you said to me, I got to revamp my course as much as this is, that'd be a difficult undertaking. So it's going to take a while for our frontline personnel, which consists of 300,000 teachers and 10,000 or more administrators, to grasp this and to do it. And so our mottos on Common Core, Smarter Balanced are patience, persistence. We're going to persist for 8 years of the Brown administration, and humility. You don't know early what's going to happen, so you adjust and try to continuously improve, but I'm not sure what's going to ensue.
What the results in the spring of 2015, and we've got testing going on right now, so we'll know soon. How were those figures received?
Well, I think they were received very well. Rather than some other states where it was viewed as schools flunk Common Core or something, we had an aggressive communications campaign which appears to have worked with our parents and our media, saying these initial scores are at a much higher standard, college and career ready, which is higher than the old California standards test called CST. And so they were ready for 20-25% to be at the level of college and career readiness in mathematics. And so that's one point. Secondly, I don't think they quite understand it. And it's going to take some time for people to understand it, and they're trying to fit it into an old paradigm of where they were before. How is my student doing compared to the average? Whereas we have much more of a continuum of levels, with the standard being college and career ready. So I think the reception is still unknown, because I think people are just beginning to comprehend it and are still partly thinking in the old paradigm view of the older test.
Was it meaningful in when it comes to assessing skill levels, or was it really so apples and oranges that you're starting all over?
I don't think you can compare the assessments. So, we deliberately discourage that. So to that extent, you're starting all over. But there still is a basic content students need to know. And the assessment does assess knowledge that you have, and the multiple choice. There are multiple choice items in the test, so it's not completely different, and it's a balance between sort of basic knowledge, knowing some chronologies in history or something, and then being able to apply it. So we have to find that balance.
A number of states have decided to not use the Smartest Balance testing design for Common Core, and it's a sizable number. There's no two ways about it. I was just reading in Education Week 3 or 4 weeks ago. How do you assess what's happening there?
What's happening there is that the Common Core standards are generally holding in between 35 and 40 states, even though they've renamed them Sunshine State Standards, Hoosier Standards. whatever standards. They've sort of played around with Common Core, added some things, subtracted some. We played around with it. We merged the English language learner curriculum into the English language arts curriculum. Nobody else has really done that as well as we have done it. So the standards have been relabeled, and then there's been some groups that have added and subtract. Where the pushback on Common Core took hold was against the assessments. The assessments are all over the map. Some states are doing their own, some are taking other states and using them. Some are using various testing companies that are vendors, for-profit vendors on the market. So that's what's happened. Now, that being said, to run a testing operation successfully, you need a large number of pupils. We believe there are 5 Western states solid for Smarter Balanced: Nevada, Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii. You can run forever on that base a successful and continually updated assessment system. California, with its 6.2 million students, is a behemoth. That we are larger than the 22 smallest states in our enrollment. So I don't fear for Smarter Balanced. Whatever happens east of Utah, I think would be nice to have much more validation of Smarter Balanced and its concepts, but I think we can go forward without it.
So, but the original idea, the whole Common Core idea, was to have a sort of a nationwide, where are we now, where are we going, what do we need to tweak to move forward? Does that sort of fall between the cracks if you have this erosion?
The first part of Common Core, which was what should students know and be able to do, set out in standards, that has held pretty well and is spread commonly across many of the states. You have states like Oklahoma, which went back to their standards in the middle 1990s. I mean, what has collapsed is more common assessment of across the country. So we're all aiming pretty much at the same, 40 or so are aiming at the same targets of what students ought to know and be able to do. How you measure that is all over the place. Now, so what'll be the default measurement will, unfortunately, in my view, be the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as NAEP. And that assessment, is not perhaps aligned as well as Smarter Balanced is with Common Core. I know currently it's not as well aligned in mathematics. It uses an old mathematics sequence. So they test our kids in 5th grade, and we had that in 6th grade, and so there's some problems. But there still will be a national report called the National Assessment of Education Progress, given in in all the states. In 5 and 8 and not in 12.
What do you see as the challenges ahead in the continuing rollout, because as you say, sort of a continuing rollout of the Smarter Balanced testing? What do you see as the challenges still ahead?
I think we'll have to look at the length of it. Other states have been cutting a little bit. We have not heard that much about the length of it. That's an issue. We need to continue to update it. We are working with Smarter Balanced on measuring career ready. California does not believe, nor does Smarter Balanced Consortium, that career ready is identical to college ready, and we're including 2-year colleges, of course, in our statements about college. And so I think that is an important thing will be to develop better measures of career ready through Smarter Balanced. That's unfinished business in our view, and there is some things afoot there. We're just beginning to get the information organized right so that school districts can use Smarter Balanced as what we intended it to be. And what it is not an assessment. It is an instructional improvement system. It has not just an assessment, but it has a digital library where each teacher has an entry code, and they can look up resources to help them reteach the areas that students are struggling with in Common Core. And we just this month, from the 215 test, this will not happen again, it'll be on time, 6 months late, got what are called the Smarter Balanced Targets. These are more fine-grained analyses of what schools really are either doing well at or not doing well in. Think fractions, for example. And so the concept of Smarter Balanced as an instructional system is that you get an assessment result, and then you get some target things that talk about, break the test down, what areas are an individual school struggling with, and then you go to the digital library, which is part of Smarter Balanced, and you match library resources for teaching and reteaching with your targets where you're falling short, and you have an instructional improvement system. So this vision is one of the reasons that we have high support from our teachers, unlike other states. Because they view it as having potential to be not just an end of the year assessment, but an instructional system.
In some cases, this has become a political football in some states, and can you ever get it out of that arena?
Well, we have not had much political pushback here. And it's been really amazing, as big and diverse as we are, how little we've had. We've had very little opting out by students from the test, few high-income communities, including Palo Alto. I think the communities that opted out all have a house value of average of $1 million, and so that was not there. And so what's some of the differences? One, of course, the political ideology out here is not as strong against it. It never really surfaced. The Republican Party in California was divided on it. The Assembly Minority Leader, Kristen Olson, supported it. Republican leader in the Assembly spoke up and down the Central Valley for it. And so we have just a different kind of politics and ideology. But really messed it up in New York was they rushed everything and smushed it together. Remember our mottos, patience and persistence. So immediately after they gave the assessment, they started evaluating teachers in the first year. They hadn't even had a chance to begin to master the teaching before they were evaluated with the testing. They rushed into their own test. There was a New York test, not Smarter Balanced, and that had flaws. And then they tied, the governor wanted to tie over 50% of the teachers' evaluation to these tests that they hadn't seen before and hadn't been able to really teach very well in terms of adapting to it. So New York just botched the implementation totally. And a lot of the pushback came out of there or out of various southeastern states. So it in some ways was really a difficult situation, and California is a huge outlier on this. So are Oregon and Washington, and Nevada, and Hawaii. So out here in the far west, and it's very different, and all the coverage is going heavily into the southeast, of course, Texas, which would, the Lone Star State, and the New York area, New York. A lot of states around New York are more quiescent, New Jersey, Maryland, those kinds of places.
You wanted to talk about differences. You wanted to talk about higher education, lower education, I guess I could call it.
Right. Okay,
we're sure we have time for that, sure.
Yeah. Well, I've written and studied considerably the history of education vis-a-vis standards and assessments between higher ed and lower ed. And we used to be, meaning in the beginning of the 20th century and for the first number of years there, much more closely aligned. And then we split apart until Common Core and Smarter Balanced has begun to bring us back. So let me tell you a little historical study. Okay, in the old days, the University of California accredited the high schools. So they knew really what the high schools were. And in the old days, the higher education was extremely tied to K-12 and what they were doing. The school down the road here, San Jose State, was a normal school, a two-year place that prepared teachers, very closely aligned. And then they became a college, and then they became a university, grew apart from us in their standards and in their assessments and their thinking. And the community colleges were part of the local school districts, 13th and 14th grade. They were called junior colleges, meaning they were the junior colleges, and they were run by the Unified School District boards. All of this began to shatter in the 20s and 30s, and we went our separate ways. The higher education used at the highest end, SAT and ACT, which were not designed or aligned to our standards or our assessments. And at the lower level, they used placement exams, which were very different. And so you went in and took an SAT. I remember taking it cold as a young man, and I'd never seen all these words and fish is to cat is to dog is to analogies, and I knew a lot of content and a lot of application, but they were, playing games with me, and so they got into that saying they were measuring aptitude. So we're measuring aptitude. That was called the Scholastic Aptitude Test, SAT. Well, the schools were not, we're trying not to get away from your aptitude in some ways and make you all successful. So our standards and assessments grew apart. Then what did they do when you entered college, like Cal State and community colleges? You get a placement exam. Those exams were done in splendid isolation from higher education. And the first time students saw that as placement exam and an animal like that was when they enrolled the first day of community college, for example. And we have a 70% failure rate on those in our community colleges. So we had not very common standards. Yeah, you had 3 years of math. What's that mean? 4 years of English. What's that? What's in those boxes? What's the standards? So people were railing about this like me. And so we saw the ability, and one of the main reasons for Common Core and now Smarter Balanced is we could take the standards and the assessments, and rather than work in separate worlds in splendid isolation, we could work together. And we could somewhat gear the K-12 curriculum from what post-secondary wanted and what careers and jobs wanted. So we worked down deductively in many ways. And that has then brought us together in a way where, for Smarter Balanced, the community colleges, almost all of them, and all of CSU will take our Smarter Balanced college-ready level on our assessment, and they will say, if you do well enough on that, we'll exempt you from this placement test, and we'll place you in regular math. And if you do just below that, you must take math in your senior year or English, and then we will grant you placement. So we had higher education people working in making Smarter Balanced. Beverly Young, the head of academics for Cal State U System, she was one of the small executive council of Smarter Balanced. Other higher education people. We created meetings between the University of California, all three systems, and K-12, and worked together on this. So this has not happened in my lifetime. And I think this is a very important thing. Now, to go back to your earlier political questions, what we have positioned in California is, you want to fight Common Core and Smarter Balanced? You're taking on California higher education. All four systems in California, including the private schools, have endorsed Common Core. The University of California is using Common Core concepts to approve high school courses called A to G. I talked about the placement exams being you can use Smarter Balanced as a placement exam with a high enough score, I think in the longer run we'll be seeing higher education institutions looking at Smarter Balanced assessment scores as one of the items in a comprehensive assessment in that regard. So I think that's another area we're going to grow. So this is the whole Common Core movement was to bring the two isolated sectors of post-secondary education, higher education, and K-12 education together. And so all of the political tumult of that has shattered that in some of the states. And I think it's too bad. Oklahoma went back to its standards in the mid-90s and brought back an old-fashioned assessment from the 90s. And Oklahoma's university system approved that. So that's where they want to go. That's where they're going to go. But we're moving in different directions, and I think it'll be very important.